Hey guys, it's me, Froggy. All right, we're gonna discuss the living legend. All right, story in Justin Posey's Beyond the Map's Edge. I need to figure out a better way to show that because when I always cover up his name, maybe I'll do it the other way. I don't know. That throws me off when I see it reflected also in the screen. Okay, so we're gonna cover. This is gonna be probably a shorter video. It's not live; it's pre-recorded. So I'm just gonna cover the living legend and probably cut it after that. This is a story I really want to give my, I don't want to say full attention to. I want to say I just want to do this one right, right? Veterans hold a special place in my heart. My father, my uncle, my brother, my aunt, my nephew, a lot of veterans in the family. I respect what they do, no matter what branch, no matter peacetime, wartime, deployed or not. I a lot of respect, and I want to hold. I want to treat the material right and do it justice, right? So again, I hold a lot of respect for Justin's grandfather here. So we're just going to cover the story. I'm going to point out some things that that jump out at me. I might point out a few things that other people have pointed out too, as long as it's all public. And then we're going to cut it after that. All right. So get into it. The living legend. Again, it's quite whenever you start a story like that, the living legend, I mean, that automatically draws your eyes, draws your attention, right? So every time I read the book, when I get to this chapter, I'm always like, okay, yeah, pay attention, lock in. There's going to be some clues in this story. There has to be. I don't think I've ever done a pass where I said, okay, this is a throwaway chapter. I think because of the reference, because of you'll see the words that he's used to describe. I mean, the title right off the bat, right? The living legend. And I mean, not just legend like, a great, glorious, mighty person, but legend like in a map, right? I mean, that's another way to look at legend. So we have a map. We're trying to build our own treasure map with words and images and theories. And here we have a legend right here. So because of all that, I always lock in on this chapter. I always try to pull something from it. I don't ever want to think that this is a throwaway chapter. Or not throwaway chapter, I should say a chapter that doesn't have a major clue in it, right? I think that's a better way. Instead of saying throwaway chapter, that's kind of, I don't know, disrespectful or kind of minimizing the effort that Justin and the editor took to assemble the book. Okay, so let's get into it, right? So first off, we got pride right there. We have Justin trying to connect with his grandfather and trying to tell us, build an analogy, right? So when I'm reading from the book, when I told my grandfather I worked on Internet Explorer at Microsoft, his eyes lit up with pride. He'd served as a game warden for decades, and so this is how Justin describes what his grandfather does in this chapter. In this story, because he's described what his grandfather does differently in other places. So this is how he describes it in this story. Mapping wilderness and blazing trails. Now, I think most of us know a little bit about game wardens. Some of us have had experiences, pleasant or unpleasant, with game wardens. And they do a lot more than just mapping wilderness and blazing trails. I don't know if you were to categorize what are the top 3 things or top 2 things that a game warden, their responsibilities. I don't know if you would say mapping wilderness and blazing trails. Now, when I get into the next couple sentences, you can see why Justin said that, because he's trying to make a parallel, right? So here we go. Here was his grandson, Justin, carrying on the family tradition of exploration, right? So he's trying to build that connection, a kind of cartographic conquest, right? Maps. I didn't have the heart to tell him that my exploration involves sitting in an air-conditioned office debugging code. My frontier is made of pixels and protocols, not mountains and meadows. Again, alliteration right there, P's and M's. So, okay, we see the point, okay? You may be thinking, Justin, a game warden doesn't just map and explore. Like, they have a lot of other responsibilities more serious than that. Is this a clue? Are you trying to say this? Okay, well, I see why, Justin. You're trying to build a correlation, right? Because you are involved with mapping and exploration in the digital realm. You're trying to make the connection but now is the connection for us to look at, or is the connection just for you, right? So I don't have a solid answer on that. I just want to point that out and draw that to people's attention if you haven't noticed that before, that you can clearly look at the end of the book and then earlier when Grandpa Fitz when Grandpa Wayne is is described and what his job is, right? But look at how it's described in this chapter. Okay, so that's kind of a little introduction here. Then we get into some Arizona's mentioned, Tucson's mentioned, the Rincon Mountain Range is mentioned. We get into some of these early exploits that would be more familiar with Justin as a child, right? So as a child, he wouldn't necessarily know about all his World War II stuff, all his game warden stuff, but he would know about Grandpa showing up and clearing the brush out of his mom's house, right? That's where we get to the bottom of 130. And then we get into him parading around in the war medals, which again, as a child, I mean, you really don't know. I remember for a school project, we had to pick a historical figure, and I chose JFK, and mainly because I knew he was a naval officer. My dad was in the Navy 22 years, and kind of, sorry, I'm gonna sneeze. I knew more about Navy history than any other branch, so my dad lent me his khakis. I think he was a Master Chief at the time, so I dressed up. I was really tall, and I think I was already my dad's height when I was like in junior high. So I remember maybe even 5th grade. I'm trying to remember when this project was. I think the project was 5th grade. I was pretty close to his height then. And so I remember dressing up and putting the ribbons on, and I had no idea what they all meant. I know now the importance of them. I know now what they mean, but I can just relate a little bit to Justin there. So then we get to the famous "I am quite deaf" pin, which I completely misrecognized. And thank you to I'm gonna blank who was it? Was it Dragon Lady? Dragon Lady might have pointed that out. But it is the "I am quite deaf" pin in the previous page, right? 129. And this is also, I want to point out, I still think I'm on this doubles alliteration thing. Whenever Justin doubles something or puts alliteration, it's something for us to key in on, right? And a lot of times there's a topic in the book where it's doubled, and so we just went from a nice transition from Jenny, a double Jenny, which the last 3 out of the last 4 stories have been Jenny. So this is a double, and now we're gonna roll right into Grandpa Wayne, right? Which is also a double because him and Jenny shared the last one. So there's a little bit of a layover there, right? Again, not sure the significance, just pointed it out. All right, and so then we get to the fact that Justin asked him to write his memoir, right? So he talks about that in his interview with me, and now he brings it up again in the book, 131, halfway through. But there were stories behind that pin, stories I wouldn't hear until I asked him to write his memoir, right? Then we get into him, again, he's repeating the migration story, the flight. I don't know if I would call it silent, but the flight from Montana to Arizona, right? We're sitting in his trailer. I don't know if this is the fated story time or the fated trip where the wheel came off, but he did it several times, so it could have been any of them. And now he opens up. He tells Justin about his time in his time in the war, right? So we hear about all of that. Again, I have to make up my mind when he goes into these stories, especially on a heavy subject like combat and PTSD and loss of life and playing dead, right? Because you might die at any second. I don't know if I'm looking for clues in that. It just doesn't feel right for me for right now, right? So I read it and I respect it, and I take the gravity from it, right? But I don't know if I'm looking for clues in, right, the Queen Mary crossing the Atlantic, or Operation Torch, or hearing about how a French nurse gave her own blood to save him. I don't know if I'm looking for clues in that, or ciphers or codes or anything really in that. I'm just trying to take the story as is. Okay, so now we, although I do kind of take a clue, again, it's several times. We were sitting in his trailer, which he had driven to Arizona to escape Montana's winter, right? So again, escaping the winter, which it makes sense. You're older, you've got a lot of injuries sustained throughout your whole life. A lot of times when you get older, the cold does something to your bones, and you just rather be in a warmer climate, right, like Arizona, or you miss your daughter and your grandson, right? So I don't know if I want to read too much into escaping Montana, mainly because I have to be careful I don't let my Montana bias go out and just pollute the videos that I do. In case you don't know, I really don't think the treasure's in Montana. All right, going to be a lot of crow to eat if it is. Here we go. After I talk about the war, I noticed how his game warden stories took on new meaning, right? So he's developing understanding. He's developing understanding by looking at history. That's one thing I've been doing, is trying to, my solve locations, trying to really deep dive the history. And that's where, fun fact, I learned that I'd always thought I don't know if I was taught this or incorrectly assumed that Lewis and Clark were the first people, Europeans will say, first Europeans to cross North America from east to west. Because I don't think the Spanish, I knew that they were in Florida and I knew that they were in the Southwest, but I don't know if I put two and two together, or I don't think they did ever do a complete east to west exploration, right? And with one person, with one expedition. Right, so I learned that, if I can get the name right, Sir, right, give him the respect, because he's knighted, Sir Alexander McKenzie was the first European, right? He was working for, I don't even know if it was the French government or the Canadian government. I think he was working for one of the large trapping organizations, trapping companies, trying to set up they're trying to see the feasibility of, they were looking for the fabled Northwest Passage as part of his stuff. He ended up finding the Arctic Circle and the Arctic Passage, but he did a complete east to west. They were trying to set up like trading posts with China, but that's a whole nother funny story. But he did a complete east to west 12 years before Lewis and Clark. And I never learned about this guy. So I don't know if it's because he's like a Canadian hero or a French hero. And, Americans, if it's not an American, we don't teach it. So I don't know. Or maybe it was my fault. I wasn't paying attention in class. So I did do a lot of goofing off. But I learned about him now, which is interesting. And maybe this is part of the process, right? You answer what lives in time for each stanza. You find your place and you deep dive into history. And if the history matches some of what's been going on in the book, maybe that's the confirmation. I'm not going to say the checkpoint word or the cipher, but maybe just lets you know that, because if you're limping along, right, that's what Justin says. He's left a lot of stuff to kind of guide you. So maybe that's kind of the stuff he's talking about. Anyways, moving back on the book. All right, so then we get into another big moment, which again, I'm not, and I don't want to say out of respect. I don't know. My gut says there's nothing in here, which if a year goes by, maybe I'll go back and deep dive because we haven't found it yet and tear this paragraph apart. But we get into a very important moment. His grandfather is 83. It's 2006, and he's being formally recognized again. There's not too much detail on what that ceremony is. I'm sure we could look it up if it's. I think people have. I've seen newspaper clippings. I don't know if that's what he's telling us to do, but that's not what I'm getting out of it. But anyways, again, so we get to the medals pinned. So this is interesting. His uniform had been long lost to time. And this is one of the main things I pick up on each time, because I said time again, because we're looking for what lives in time, right? It just seems to me that, I don't know, with all the resources at their disposal, and again, I haven't really tried to source it, so I could be speaking out of my butt right now, but I would have thought it wouldn't be that difficult to assemble a time period uniform again. And I don't know, maybe the grandfather didn't want to, or because so here's the point I'm getting at, right? This is a big deal, right? Senator Conrad Burns, chairman of the Congressional Armed Service Committee, right? That's federal stuff. That's chairman of the committee, right? Big ceremony. He's being recognized after this time. But here's this line: his uniform had been long lost to time. So he wore a secondhand shirt from the thrift store. And again, I don't know if he's saying, in my head I'm picturing, and maybe this is wrong, a secondhand shirt from a thrift store, not an army surplus store. In my head I'm just picturing an olive green like dress shirt, right? Not an old uniform, right? So his uniform's lost to time, so he went to the surplus store and grabbed another one. Although maybe in 2006 it's pretty difficult to grab a World War II era thrift, but I wouldn't think it is. And maybe I'm getting too hung up on that part, right? Maybe there's nothing really to it. It just seems that he should have been able to, and maybe he didn't have enough notice. Maybe that's what it was, shorthand notice. I thought my uniform was here and it's not, or he couldn't fit into it, so we have to get a secondhand store. There's not enough time to get a used from an army surplus store. I don't know. I'm probably thinking way too much into that, but the phrase "long lost of time" keyed in because it's time, right? And we're looking for what lives in time. But anyways, here's a really massive part. Getting down to the bottom, page 132. If you have a hardback book, right next to a nice stoic picture of him of his grandfather on the horse, we get this powerful sentence. Sometimes I being Justin, sometimes I stand in front of my bathroom mirror, searching my face for traces of him, for evidence of the DNA that has survived gunfire and moved mountains. Most days I can't see it, but I can feel something else, a different kind of deafness creeping in, right? A nice little M dash right there separating the L's and A. That's a powerful sentence, right? That's in a book full of light fun jabs. That's like that's a straight, or that's a hook or an uppercut, right? That's a powerful sentence right there. The way I interpret it is that might be one of the confessional chapters, right? There's this new thread, and this isn't private. It was shared private with me a few weeks ago, but it's enough people have talked on about it and discussed it in Discord that I can say it openly now. I hope, but I'm gonna do it anyways. But so there's this theory that, and early on, people had to question Justin. I can't remember if on X or Facebook, but like, when you say confessions, what do you mean by confessions? And Justin replies, "Have you read the Stormy Stakeout or the Beano whatever, the Beano something? I'm blanking on the name. Beano Betrayal. There it is." And so that's his response, like, "Hey, I have confessions in this book. This is my confessions." But when I think of confessions, right, I think of you're telling the truth to someone. And again, truth, whenever I hear these poem words, it's just like something goes off my brain, like focus, right? So in the poem, right, let's read that out word for word. In the poem, we are, me and you, truth rests not in clever minds. This is the end of the poem, 5th stanza. Truth rests not in clever minds, right? That's what we're looking for. We're looking for the truth. And if Justin is saying, well, there's certain chapters that are my confessional chapters where I tell you the truth. Now, most of the time, it relates to a confessional. It's either embarrassing or it's something that you've hid, right, in a religious aspect due to like sin and a whole bunch of other stuff. It's something that you wouldn't necessarily say. So this right here, this is not embarrassing by any means, but this is like raw and something you don't normally share with someone. So I could see this as a confessional. Maybe not the whole story is a confessional, but this part of the story is a confessional, which would mean it's the truth, right? Sometimes I stand in front of my bathroom mirror, right? So he's looking. This is a little bit of self-doubt. He's looking for something in himself, right? And most days he can't see it, right? And now we get into a little bit of deafness coming in, not from honestly, right? Again, there's another truth buzzword, honestly. His came honestly, artillery fire and survival carved into his flesh until he needed that pin. I'm quite deaf, but mine comes quietly. So this is from because his time in the soft death, right, of climate controlled rooms and ergonomic chairs, basically talking about he's being coddled in this office type environment. He's not out there running and gunning in the woods. He's not out there slaying dragons. He's in the digital world, doing great things, right? Putting his family in great position by making smart financial moves and all this stuff, and furthering his career. But he doesn't feel that way. He feels part of himself going deaf. He feels part of himself dying. And we get some of that confessional in some of his interviews and in other parts of the book, right? And I think in the Ben Wallace interview, maybe. Or article might be a better term for it. But, and then we get to the very end. Then I catch myself doing something impossibly hard just because it needs doing, right? And I realize maybe the greatest achievement of our ancestors, reading directly from the book, wasn't surviving their wars. It was making us believe we could survive our own, right? That's pretty deep, right? That's and again, I think that might be part of the book that's just a good moral or a good lesson to take. But we have to be careful with that, because now I go back to the earlier part where he says, page XI, right, page 11 in the introduction. Either way, what you won't get is some ghost-written memoir where every failure leads to a perfect lesson. All right, what you will get is obsession laid bare, complete with bare encounters. Nice little double right there, right? Bare. Algorithm failures and one very patient dog, right? So that's laid bare is another kind of confessional, truth, honesty word. That's what we're getting from here. So not necessarily a neat little lesson. So again, what is that? Is that double speak? Hey, you're not going to get lessons, or maybe he's saying not every story has a lesson, right? So some do. That's another thing we have to find, right? So I don't know. I do think this is a very powerful story, powerful section right there. The Living Legend is titled strongly right from the beginning, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. There's some stuff that's Justin being raw and real with us. There's some more insights, but there's also enough interesting words, enough use of poem words to give you hey, maybe he's trying to tell us something here, right? So, I don't know. Those are my thoughts on that. This is a short video. I'm probably gonna cut it soon. I don't think there's anything else I want to talk about right now. Yeah, other than thank you again for the support. Thanks everyone for watching. Got a lot of new members, a lot of new people joining, a lot of new subscribers. So love that. If you like the shirt, we do have the new Froggy shirts out, Froggy merch. I do need to get myself one of the ones without the white, because all the new ones I was able to take away this white background so it's not as square looking. But I've watched it a couple times, so it's breaking in nicely. And again, we always have these nice Estes Quest cups right there. A couple different designs on them. We got little frogs holding some coins. Got the logo right there. Keeps your drink in a container so it's easy to drink. I need to cut a better promo out of that. All right, thanks guys. Bye, take care, good luck. Be safe.